Morning. I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting of September 1st, 2016 to order. And if you join me now with I might just make a note. Ted is ill today. He won't be joining us. So we've got 4 planning commissioners and staff. And so now's the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Do we have any agenda changes this morning?
No.
No agenda changes. Next is our public comment period. If there's someone with us that would like to address the Planning Commission on an item that is not a land use item, not on our agenda this morning, this would be your opportunity.
This isn't on the agenda this morning, but my name is Jack Cox with the Lake Tulloch Alliance. With this discussion this morning on planning on the Lake Tulloch region, I wanted to ask the Planning Commission to take steps to investigate why the December 15, 2009 resolution of the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors to work with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to create a public access road to New Melones Reservoir from Copperopolis has not been followed through on. The property owners of that land are in support of that. Board Chairman then, Russ Thomas, sent a letter on behalf of the board on December 30th, 2009. However, Board Chairman Steve Walensky sent another letter to the Bureau of Reclamation on September 17th, 2008. Even earlier, Board Chairman Bill Claudino sent a letter to the Bureau in 2007. The road would provide access from an already crowded Lake Tulloch. We had 2 people hit in a boat just about 3 weeks ago. One lady is in a coma, I believe, in Stockton. The road would provide access for water sports, fishing, and other recreational activities. And in your discussion about the growth of Lake Tulloch, that lake can only hold so many boats. So relieving a pressure valve to allow people to utilize Melones as well as Tulloch would be a very important move. Ultimately, that goal would be to establish a marina and boat launching facility at the end of the road. Earlier than those letters, in 2002, the Lake Tulloch Alliance, working with the homeowners associations at the lake, established this as a key goal. Nearly a decade has gone by since the board acted to establish this access, and I would hope that this would be included in your agenda in the future. It's a travesty that the intent of the Board of Supervisors of this county was not followed through by county staff or by future boards to make this happen. The Morrissey family's in support of this. It would be an excellent move in thinking about the long-term development of Lake Tulloch, and I hope you would take action, Mrs. Chairman, to see if you can follow up on this and bring this to the fore. Thank you.
Do you have the resolution number?
Yeah. I don't know if you have all the correspondence here. I have it. The resolution number was 09-227.
Thank you.
A resolution requesting the Bureau of Reclamation to adhere to this 1976 New Melones Lake Area Motor Plan. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Buckley with CSERC. I checked with your chair to ask when it would be most appropriate to provide some general process comments that are not specific to the individual items, and I'm doing that now as succinctly as possible. You know, as I've watched the process and as I've also followed with the coverage for the days that I haven't been here, it's really clear that you guys are trying to be sensitive to county residents and to make sure that they have an opportunity to come in and ask for a different land use designation if they're not satisfied with what they believe is before them. And it's understandable that whether it's those today or at other days, are trying to get what they feel is best for themselves. It's totally understandable. Unfortunately, the way the process has always has evolved is that there are 2 issues that I'm just listing as issues, and I ask you to think of as the process goes forward. I brought up the first one 2 weeks ago, which is the issue of pre-entitlement, and most of you are probably familiar with that. but even when I've talked with your planning staff, to my understanding, you haven't had county council come in and make it very clear to you why that can significantly undermine the general plan and the adequacy of it being determined by a court to be legal. Pre-entitlement is favoring a project without that project having gone through the normal state mandated CEQA process, steps for consideration. And just to give you a quick example, one that I tried to bring as something it's simple to understand. If you and then the board follow through to provide an intensive development land use designation for hundreds of acres or for thousands of acres that are outside the area that is now the boundary of a water and sewer district, that designation now can be used by that property owner to go to the districts and get the boundaries expanded or other things. It's a pre-entitlement that without all the property owners around that haven't had an opportunity to understand specifically what is being proposed. You haven't notified every adjacent property owner of these proceedings or all the other things of what's being, the land use designations that are being proposed for revision. It would be pre-entitlement as just one of the examples of many ways that pre-entitlement can favor a project. What it really boils down to is if there's evidence of pre-entitlement in the general plan update, it will be more vulnerable to a challenge. The second key point ties to projections of growth and the fact that just today, based on what planning staff has assessed, is the actions just today, not talking about the previous weeks, could provide for up to 20 to 25,000 new residents. And as the State Department of Finance projection of growth for the county for the next 20 years has put forward less than 9,000 new residents total for the entire county. And your planning staff has said, well, where are the areas that are most logical and that you and the supervisors need to assume there will be growth, and that's the Valley Springs and the Copperopolis areas. So right now, 1/3 of all the projected growth that's being estimated is spread across the entire rest of Calaveras County, only 1/3, and instead you are being recommended to consider 1/3 for the Copperopolis Basin, 1/3 for Valley Springs. If you do that, and Copperopolis should plan for roughly 3,000 new residents, which is in their staff report, without a single new development or any changes in land use designations, the Copperopolis area already has more vacant or fully approved lots than is desired to meet or is needed to meet that projected housing need. And that's even if you completely threw out Oak Canyon Ranch, and even if you dismiss Tuscany Hills, which legally you have to consider because it has been approved and is still viable. So the reason I'm sharing this before people get up is obviously everyone who's going to get up is going to be passionate, looking at it from their perspective, understanding what their individual needs are, and they're going to be effective in describing that. But for the 99.9% of county residents that are not here as advocates or are supportive necessarily of any of these specific land use designation changes, the challenge is after all these years to get a plan through that is going to be legal, that is not going to be highly vulnerable to a legal challenge, or that isn't literally going to flaunt as if like, go ahead and sue us because we're going to do this, by adding in additional growth far beyond the 50 to 73,000 new residents that last year's draft general plan executive summary shared would already be available for growth in the county based on the existing designations within the county. So the state is saying you need less than 9, but that's just a figure. That's just an estimate, and you needed twice that much. You're already, depending on how it's evaluated, there's 50 to 70,000 new residents that could be provided for by existing things without the land use designation changes that are going forward. So just in terms of process, as we go through the rest of the individual items today, I'm simply asking you to remember that it's not just recommendations to the board and then the board taking action and this was what the plan. The EIR has to mitigate for all of the growth. And I do ask you, if you have questions of this, to talk with your planning staff. the EIR must mitigate for the growth that you allow in excess and must justify as to how that mitigation would take place. And today, if there's up to 20,000 or more people provided for, you will be burdening your plan that much more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I feel I need to respond to the previous comments and provide you with the additional source of information regarding the projected growth in Calaveras County. My name is Dennis Mills. I'm a director on CCWD. And that is to refer to the Calaveras County Water District 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, which gives the projected figures that are currently being used for infrastructure within the county. And those are coming directly from the California Department of Finance as well. And they're not 9,000. So I would just ask you to take the time to take a look at that plan and the projected growth rates that are listed in that plan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Colleen Platt with MyValleySprings.com and the Calaveras Planning Coalition. I too want to speak to kind of the process and the big picture of what you've been doing at the Planning Commission and what you're going to do today. As far as the enormous amount of acreage that you will be looking at today, I understand it's almost 8,000 acres, 7,900 acres. And to put that in perspective, over the last month, the last 3 Planning Commission hearings, you've been looking at a similar amount of acreage all over the county. And today you're looking at this acreage in just one area. I just want to kind of make that clear. So over the last 3 meetings, you've actually increased the density on 2,830 acres of land. On August 11th, it was 1,171 acres. On August 16th, it was 551 acres. And August 25th, it was 1,108 acres. So basically, 2,830 acres of land have been lost from open space conservation to residential subdivisions from this general plan draft map I'm talking about. So to balance these figures, we do thank the Planning Commission for retaining quite a bit of acreage of land. You did deny many change requests to increase the density and convert resource production lands to subdivisions. You've retained approximately 6,000 acres of lands in resource protection and working lands. So almost 3,000 acres were taken out, but 6,000 acres were retained. So those are some interesting figures. I just wanted you to be aware of what you've the progress you've been making, and that today you're looking at those totals all in one day in one area. That's a significant amount of acreage to be considered to change for development in just one area, and you undoubtedly are aware that will cause many impacts to roads, traffic, the environment, services, and much more. Also, I believe it would affect, as Mr. Buckley referred, and I think Mr. Infusino has referred in letters, this could affect our general plan update and our environmental impact report. The planning director has also been concerned about making such significant changes that it would possibly conflict with what you've done already and create a need for revisions. Due to these potential large areas of new development, increased mitigations required, new environmental issues, this could cause delays and changes and additional costs to the EIR. So I just want you to keep that in mind with the significance of what you're doing. And also, there's a possibility those changes to the map could lead to an imbalance and conflicts with what you've done in the text so far. So you might have to revise areas of the open space conservation resource production elements to reflect what you've done on the map. So these are just considerations. So when you are faced with these big questions today on large areas, we just suggest some caution. and ask yourself questions about each change. What is the existing available infill and approved lots in the area already? Is that adequate, or is there more necessary in the time frame of the general plan update? Should residential be the primary purpose of these lands you're looking at? Or is this is there a better, wiser use for the areas? Do the lands have constraints? You're looking at a lot of different parcels. Are they the most suitable ones for development, or are there other parcels that are better? Are these logical areas for infrastructure expansion and development? And what direction should the community go? These are the questions you're being asked today, and you should ask that on each parcel coming before you. So just to put that in perspective, this is a big area. Has any need been shown for conversion of 8,000 acres to residential development? I believe the planning director has demonstrated that there are a lot of vacant lots already in subdivisions approved, not built out. So that should be a consideration. You're looking at the 20-year planning window here, and we have subdivisions that have been waiting for 20 years to build out, and they're not there yet. So just some matters for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, do you have something new?
Yes, to this specifically, because they talked about how the subdivisions in the number of buildable lots. I'm past president of the Copperopolis Copper Cove Homeowners Association. I can tell you that many of the lots that are remaining are unbuildable. Secondly, in 1848, the population of San Francisco was 300. 5 years later, it was 30,000. The average value of a home in San Jose in 2000 was $400,000. The median price is now $1 million. I would caution the board, you cannot predict the future. You need to provide flexibility in your planning process. So the very idea of saying we're going to have X number of people in the future, nobody knows. The internet has changed everything. 25 years ago, we did not have the internet. People could not live here and commute and basically telecommute all over the world. So it's very, very dangerous to try to put these kinds of things that these folks just talked about on top of this, and they really need to understand the land they're talking about, because you can't build on every lot in Copper Cove or other areas which have already been designated for lots. That's all I wanted to say.
Good morning, Tom Infacino, Calaveras Planning Coalition. I hope you got a copy of the email I sent in last night, so just want to summarize a few points. First, I want to thank you for considering all of the copper suggestions at once. I think this is a very constructive process in that regard. I also want to thank the staff for the staff report, which correctly identifies some of the problems posed by granting all of these proposed map changes. First point I want to make is that oversupplying the market depresses real estate prices. I'm going to say that once more slowly, because I think it's important to note. Oversupplying the market tends to reduce prices. The owners of those other parcels in the market are real people too, and I doubt many of the owners of these other parcels will be eager to vote for a supervisor that made their property values go down. Second point I want to make is that granting all of the requests will increase regulation and mitigation costs. I'm going to give two examples. The first is road impact mitigation, and the second is species habitat mitigation. By 2035, if the county gets all the development fair share fees and all the state fees and all the federal funds it expects to get for roads, according to the Regional Transportation Plan, that money will only cover 32% of the costs of roads needed to accommodate an additional 11,000 people. So put another way, the fair share cost for the rest of the citizenry is over $600 million. The people of Calaveras County will not be excited by the prospect of an additional $600 million in taxes. Now, that's just for the 11,000 people they expect to get between now and 2035. If you add more than the expected level of development and concentrate it in one area, then you must add to the circulation element a benefit basin update, or a regional traffic impact mitigation fee to cover the development's fair share of the additional road costs necessitated by the increased level of development. Also, the map in the circulation element needs to identify the roads in the Copperopolis area that need expansion. New subdivisions will not be lawfully approved unless the county also puts in place the means to finance the public infrastructure needed to support that private development. You got to have both. The second example is that the county must develop a habitat conservation plan for off-site habitat replacement. In order to get a permit for development of a project from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there's basically two options. You can set aside endangered species habitat on the property and avoid it off-site, or you compensate by contributing to some off-site habitat preserve. However, there is no provision in your conservation and open space element to create such an off-site preserve. So if you add the proposed residential development densities onto the land use map today, you will also need to add a commitment to develop a habitat conservation plan in the open space and conservation element. Those things go hand in hand. There are many other issues we could discuss when it comes to the costs and regulatory challenges of changing Copperopolis to this degree, but those two are just good the examples I brought forward. The basic point is, if the county is committed to developing Copperopolis to the intensity envisioned by the proposed changes on the land use map, then it also needs to commit to the public funding and the public conservation programs needed to make that development subject to lawful approval. You can't do one and not the other. Finally, I just want to say, I already talked about the frustration of having had two community plan processes in Copperopolis and not having a community plan text for Copperopolis. Again, we strongly encourage that the county include a community plan text for Copperopolis in the general plan update. And as noted in the previous letter, we think that a useful component of that would include a list of the conditions that would need to be met prior to rezoning parcels as suitable for development. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we are going to move on to the consent agenda, which there is none. So on to the public hearing, which is a Planning Commission review and recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on the general plan update. This morning we are talking about the land use map draft 4 for Copperopolis. Peter?
Good morning, Peter Maurer, Planning Department. We just had sort of a preview of some of the issues that I want to highlight before we get into consideration of individual requests for specific parcels. The region we're talking about, Copperopolis, saw a lot of growth prior decade, and actually for some time. When the economic crisis hit, the housing bubble burst, things came to sort of a screeching halt, county-wide as well as here in the Copperopolis area. As was stated, there are a number of previously approved projects, and so I highlighted some of those in my report to you, but we've got the Saddle Creek development here, Tuscany Hills, the existing development throughout the region. This is the Oak Canyon Ranch, this area here. While it's still technically on the books, my understanding is that there's, I know that there is a process going on with the landowners trying to get a conservation easement established on that, and that is in process now, likely to be concluded sometime later this fall. At that point in time, the owner will be coming back with a general plan amendment and request to rescind the development agreement. So while technically there are 30-some thousand or 30-some hundred lots, residential lots, as well as a hotel facility proposed on that, we really shouldn't consider that as part of the current, what's the word I'm looking for, inventory of potential housing in this area. So going to step back a little bit and talk about the general plan in general. And it's a planning horizon of usually about 20 years. It's probably as far as anyone can reasonably foresee into the future. And obviously there are surprises along the way. The counties and cities in this state have been required to do a general plan for many years. And the practice has been, we go through this horrible exercise that takes years and years. And we finally adopt a plan, and maybe it's litigated and maybe it's not, but everyone breathes a sigh of relief that it's done, and then it sits on a shelf. And then development occurs or doesn't occur, the community moves on, and suddenly there's some conflict over the plan, and the determination is made, it's out of date, we need to update it again. So then, 15, 20 years later, we start the process all over again. My approach, and I hope the county would take it, would be that we revisit the general plan on a regular basis, and we test the policies and the map against the reality on the ground. What is happening? How is our plan working? I like to liken it to a business plan. Someone's going to open up a business, doesn't create a business plan and say, this is what I'm going to do it, and I'm going to follow it, regardless of what happens. Maybe they're making money, maybe they're not. If we find that there are policies that are stymieing the type of development that we want to have, or that are creating impacts to resources or roads that we hadn't anticipated, we need to go back and adjust the plan. But we adjust it incrementally as we need to, not a wholesale rewrite of the plan. And so this is not something that is set in stone. It can be changed. It should be changed. It should be looked at regularly and adjusted where necessary. And so the approach that I have taken, and I think that my predecessors and the county board before I arrived here, was to scale back some of the development that we had previously planned for, much more than would be anticipated to occur in any reasonable timeframe horizon. And so you need to have some flexibility. You need to provide opportunities for development and not narrow it down so much that we just have like a one-to-one match of expected demand and availability. The question really is how much flexibility is necessary in order to make a plan effective and efficient. We do need to look at the impacts of that potential development. So if we plan for 50,000 new people, then we need to look at, well, what are the impacts associated with that? What are the road impacts, the impacts to the ability to provide public services and infrastructure, and the impacts to natural resource, biological resources, those kinds of things. So there's a balance there that we're trying to meet that is looking at what is the potential future growth based on known or expected extrapolations of growth patterns. Where is it most likely to go? Where is it most appropriate to go? And how much oversupply is necessary to provide flexibility so that the market can react to changes. And then again, let's look at it on a regular basis, and I would recommend we come back at least every 2 years and say, how are we doing? And it may be, hey, we're doing just fine. The plan is working, we're getting some development, or we may find, no, we've created some constraints that we need to remove because we're not getting the type of growth that we'd like to see, or whatever the result is. But that's something that we need to be doing regularly. The issue of resource production, we talked a lot about that when we were going through the resource production element, and you may recall that there was a recommendation in the previous draft that provisions be included that had some fairly strict requirements for removal of land from resource production and future development of that. That was the Appendix B that was recommended by the Ag Coalition, but was removed because it was found by its commission to be too or inappropriate for whatever reason. And so that's no longer a part of the general plan. Now, part of the CEQA process will require us to look at how much resource production land is in the county, how much might be removed from resource production, particularly agricultural land, and timberland and mineral resources, by future development, and how do we offset that as part of the requirements of CEQA, that we look at the loss of agricultural land. And so there will be some analysis of that in the EIR. But if we have identified areas that we think are appropriate for future growth, and we said the rest of this area right now, let's keep it in resource production. That doesn't mean it's locked up forever. And as changes in demographics, changes in growth pattern occur, we can go back and amend that plan appropriately to add more area if necessary. So the purpose of the plan is to say this is where we want to direct the growth to, and by having significantly more land available in an area or in the whole county, it effectively detracts from the whole planning process of saying, here we're trying to direct growth here, otherwise it becomes a sort of free-for-all. Anyone who has land that's been sort of designated, that's where it's appropriate to develop. So we have a challenge here before us. There are very strongly competing interests in this community. There's those who would like to see it stay small and relatively rural. There's others who would like to see much more growth. We don't expect the kind of growth that was occurring in the mid-2000s to come back in the near future. It could change. This was essentially being developed as a mix of bedroom community for the valley and recreational community around the lake itself. Will that demand for housing increase? We don't see it happening in the immediate future. Could it happen 10, 15 years from now? Possibly. So those are, that's part of the guesswork, the trying to look far-sighted as to what is out there and what's likely to occur. So I lost my train of thought there. There are areas that have been identified for potential future growth. Particularly the areas around the existing historic community and the town center here. There's some infill areas throughout here. And there are probably areas that could be expanded to accommodate a larger area of future growth. I would caution about significant changes of large areas where we really just don't have the demand for it in the foreseeable future. I'm sure there's some things that I missed, but they'll probably come up in the discussion. Do you have any questions of me before we get into specific land use requests?
Yes. It's a question directed at how CEQA works. I think you said that CEQA would require us to look at how much resource production land has been removed. And my question is, compared to what? Compared to the 1996 plan, because actually we are creating more resource production land than existed in the 96 plan, or compared to what's on the ground. In other words, if you have a large tract of land that has a designation of 5-acre minimums, but it's still a cattle ranch, is that what you look at?
CEQA requires us to compare the plan against what's on the ground. It's not a plan-to-plan analysis, it's a plan-to-ground analysis.
Thank you.
The other thing about CEQA, since we're on that topic, we will be preparing an EIR. We will be probably coming up with additional mitigation measures that may or may not be applied to this plan. CEQA requires that we identify the potential impacts, mitigate them to the extent feasible, but also allows the county to decide based on facts, evidence in the record, that these mitigation measures are infeasible or undesirable based on overriding considerations. And that could be a wide variety of things, and that's something we'll get into as we get into the EIR. Typically, the findings to support the approval of an EIR and a general plan are, several hundred pages long. There's a lot of documentation that goes into that to document that here is why these measures were accepted and these measures were rejected. So it's not necessarily that every single impact has to be fully mitigated. We try to do that to the extent possible. The law requires us to do that, but it also allows the decision makers to determine that not all of it is feasible or desirable based on other considerations of what the plan is trying to do.
I have a couple of questions. The Old Canyon area, you said about 3,000 lots were part of that original proposal?
Yes.
Yes, in that general ballpark.
And how many acres was that area total?
Ooh, off the top of my head, I don't remember.
It's not totally important. 3,000 lots pretty much covers my question on that. I also had another question, which I had been talking to somebody from Copperopolis, and a gentleman did bring it up during the opening comments, is about the road going through the Morrissey land that was proposed. And it's not included in the general plan right now. And I'm curious as to why it never made the transfer over when it was brought up prior with the prior Board of Supervisors and the prior planning commissions.
We don't have, I did not receive a specific request from Morrissey as far as any land use designation on their property. Now, that might have been something that had been talked about previously that didn't get to me, but as far as current requests for land use, I didn't have that. As far as the road, my understanding was that there was some initial contact with the Bureau of Reclamation, whoever's operating Malonis in the land, and they have basically said that we're not interested in it. We have no intention on developing recreational access on that side of the lake, and so it would essentially be a road to nowhere. Now that is my understanding. I haven't seen anything in writing to that, but in my conversations with other people in the county, Public Works, that was my understanding of that, so that's why it's not. That doesn't mean we can't add it if we think it's appropriate. And that may be something that, amending the circulation element, show a road that would provide that, and maybe, over time, the federal government changed its approach towards providing additional recreation. But the reason it's not there now was that the Bureau of Reclamation said we're not going to spend any money on developing recreational resources on that side of the lake.
Okay, so the road went to Maloney's but did not go to 49?
No, it would just come to, drag this down a little bit here. Gosh, stop freezing. The road would be somewhere in this general area, is my understanding. And the current access is over in this area here. So there's quite a bit of area that's would not connect.
I think your understanding is correct. That the federal government agencies, the Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers did not want that road going through their ground to the lake for whatever reasons. And if you can't go through the government ground to get to their lake, it's a dead-end road, goes nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Is that your only question? Okay. So, Peter, I know that you said it's what's on the ground, but if we look at the 96 plan to today's draft 4, how much land was in resource production in 96 compared to today in acreages?
Well, we don't have a resource production designation with the 96 general plan.
Okay, so how much acreage
so-
have we put into draft 4 under resource production?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that figure. There is quite a bit of land, and just in this area, just as for comparison, there's the 96, there's the 96 plan. The yellow area is future single-family residential, 5 acre. The lighter gray is the specific plan areas. This is community center, which was higher density residential, commercial uses, and residential center here, which depending on the availability of water was from half-acre parcels up to 5-acre parcels. So you can see that there is, this was the natural resources lands, agricultural. This was natural resources lands, timber and mineral resources. So that's 96. And going to what's proposed today, this is the area that is shown as proposed resource production, which is in some ways comparable. It's 40-acre minimum. I think the ag natural resource lands designation was a 20-acre minimum.
Okay,
So the main areas where it changes are sort of on this side of the, and down in this area here.
I guess for me, I mean, we can look at just Copperopolis, but when I look at the entire county and how much resource production land we've added into draft 4, when I listen to the speakers during public comment, we're being told how much land we're freeing up. And in reality, if we had those acreage numbers, I think people would see we haven't freed up anything. We've taken a lot. And by looking at that acreage that we put into resource production into draft 4 compared to what our county currently looks like, I don't think we've given up a whole lot of anything. I think even with what we've already released, that we're still adding a ton of resource production into this general plan draft 4.
Yes, there is, and if you look, overall in the county, there's, a much greater area that is not something that's been designated for future residential use. Particularly here in the southwestern portion of the county, from Jenny Lind all the way down to Copperopolis is, primarily resource production.
So when people are here saying that we are adding to it, in reality, that we're adding to the population growth areas, we've actually taken a lot away, not added. What we're doing is looking at areas that we've put into resource production, which is a mass amount of land in this county overall, and we are looking at adding some back into the general plan. Even with what we've added, it doesn't even come close to what we've taken away.
I guess that's one way to look at it. I think that the 96 plan way over allocated lands for future development, well beyond what was expected to come.
Okay.
But you're correct in that the land use designations on the old general plan, current general plan, provided for much greater development than what is proposed in this plan.
Okay. The next thing was when we were talking about paying attention to road improvements and boundaries and infrastructure facilities, and we basically have community areas that are trying to be developed out and trying to stay within those parameters and not allowing excessive build out outside of that. When we're looking at that bigger picture like that, I've struggled with that, and I have pulled myself into that circle quite a bit, which wasn't easy, but I did it. And now I'm looking at the impacts to inside of the communities that we have taken away. So when I'm looking at the community development areas, you know, where we were taking away was outside of that, trying to keep everything in for infrastructure purposes. But now it appears that a lot of the resource production people that are coming forward that say, I don't want resource production, are within those community parameters. So we've added resource production inside of the community parameters, which goes against, well, all the work we've done in the general plan saying build within.
There are some areas, and particularly here in Copperopolis, where there are areas designated resource production that might otherwise be sort of considered infill.
And we noticed it in Valley Springs too.
In this case, those areas that, and at least on some areas, particularly here, it's a very constrained site. And so that's why that designation was recommended for that.
Constrained as far as natural impediments, or?
Yes, slope, natural resources, rare plants, a variety of different things.
So when we were looking at population growths, and I hate to bring this up, everybody bear with me. When we talked about those population growths, it didn't include this marijuana industry that has driven mass amounts of people into our county. We don't know where that's going in the future, but they're here, and the population has already exploded over that. Obviously, that's not in the numbers. And when people sit here and say, and I appreciate what you said in the very beginning, saying, hey, every 2 years we have to take a look at what that population is, because this is just a projection. I guess what I'm trying to do is say, from the public comment in the lectures about the population won't, that's probably an overreach, and we're giving back too much. Well, in reality, I guess what I'm trying to say is, we're not giving back too much. We've taken away more than we've given back. And that population growth being looked at every 2 years, I think, is very important. Because 9,000 may not be that number. It could be 5,000. So, or it could be much larger. I mean, obviously,
yes,
we're a rural county that we love, and we like that small county. That's why we all live here. But the population growth does exist. And even though we say you can keep your 5-acre, 10-acre, 20-acre, instead of going into resource production, it does not mean that land will ever be developed. It just keeps that individual from having to do a general plan amendment and spending thousands and thousands upon thousands of dollars trying to return it around.
Absolutely, you're right.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing about that, though. It's like if there's really no chance that it'll ever be developed, they don't spend the thousands of dollars, but the county spends thousands of dollars to assess the impacts through the CEQA on the general plan. So, I mean, it gets paid for, but it gets paid for by the county.
Okay, but they already have a lesser, so some of them already have the 5-acre ability. And so that's already been assessed in our 96 plan. We're taking all that out away from them. So when you say that, when we're looking at having to look at those 5-acre parcels that currently exist that we're dumping into resource production, they already had that designation. So when we're looking, if the county's going to take their designation away and we're going to be looking at that whole process, that's the county's responsibility, not an individual's. We're changing their land use designation. They're not asking for it to be changed on most of these.
No, but I think that for example, one of the requesters has property on the east side of O'Byrne's Ferry Road, and that part of it is designated future single-family residential. But O'Byrne's Ferry Road is a level service D road, which means that development, there's a 40-acre minimum. So you can't say that they were given 5-acre development. It would be 40 acres, which is resource production.
Why should they be punished if we're changing their land use designation on the general plan CEQA reports?
I don't see it as being punishment. And it's 40 acres is 40 acres until you improve O'Burns Ferry Road.
Well, and that was one of the other notes that I made too when discussions were being had about road improvements and infrastructure, sewer, water. Those costs land on the developer, not the county. If somebody applies for a development and they want to develop out their property, there is an entire process that goes into place, a public process, public comment, and it seems to me that people are coming forward, taking land rights and putting them into a much larger base. But if somebody brings a project forward, that's the time to be looking at the environmental impact on that project, and public being brought forward saying, no, this project will not work here. That's that person's right to pay for their own environmental report and see if their project does fit in and if they can provide the infrastructure through their own developer costs.
You're absolutely right that the when a development comes forward, they will have to look at the site-specific impacts as well as cumulative impacts of their project. Something large scale is typically going to require an EIR, and they will look at the specific impacts. What we're looking at now are the broader impacts of, if we identify land for 50,000 people, then we have to accommodate and we have to look at, well, what's the cost of providing the roads for 50,000 people? In some cases, that additional traffic, which may never occur, may end up necessitating a 4-lane road where a 2-lane road would otherwise suffice. Now, obviously, that road isn't built until the impacts are on the ground. So if that land is ultimately built. But part of it is the funding mechanism necessary to build that road is, right now, it's the RIM fee, or a benefit basin fee. And everyone ends up paying into that. And if you're designing you're estimating the cost of construction of a 4-lane road, that's going to increase the cost for everyone else who is also trying to develop. Even those who are trying to build a house on an existing lot will pay a RIM fee that's going to be, in some cases, higher than necessary. There's a threshold. You can't build half a lane. And so once you cross that point where it says, okay, 2-lane road will not be able to handle the planned for traffic, then we have to plan for a 4-lane road here. And the costs are significantly greater. And so the fee has to be based on what we expect the growth to be based on our general plan and planned accordingly. So we can, in some cases, end up affecting the cost of other development by over-planning the amount of growth that could occur.
I think about when we were working on the other elements in the general plan, and one of the things we did was address roads, and the county isn't taking any more roads, and the developer has got to plan for the improvements, the maintenance on those roads. On the main highways, that's where their CEQA and environmental impact reports come in, and that's where that cost goes on that developer. So I guess what I'm looking back on is the elements that we worked on, saying the county's not adopting any more roads, but that developer is going to be responsible for those. But, we could beat this down to a dead horse, and I'm ready to move on when you are.
Any other questions of Peter?
Yes. Could you explain to us your understanding of this concept of pre-entitlements that was raised by the public?
I don't really consider it a pre-entitlement so much as it is the first step in going through a process. Commissioner Muniz has sort of referred to that, where they will have to do their own environmental analysis. We'll look at the project. So if we have identified an area that we think is appropriate for future development, the very first step in any kind of development is ensuring it's in conformance with the general plan. Where the county has identified areas for future development and designated as such, that first step is sort of out of the way. And I think that is what is being referred to as pre-entitlement. They still have to go through probably a zone change, a tentative map, a specific plan, whatever the proposal is to get that development entitlement. And in some cases where we have over-allocated, oversupplied the market, that could be viewed as pre-entitlement. That we've done the big picture environmental analysis for those potential future projects by looking at things such as overall road impacts, broad scale impacts to oak woodlands or natural resources, those kinds of things. It's not a site-specific analysis by any means, but it's if we're going to be removing 5,000 acres worth of oak woodland, we have to come up with a mitigation plan, not the actual mitigation itself, but how are we going to mitigate that when those projects come forward. It could be a habitat conservation plan, as we referred to previously. It could be some other kinds of program, adopting a rim fee or a benefit basin fee that looks at all of that development. And that is a cost that we will be fronting through the EIR process for the general plan. And that's, again, sort of why it's important. We do need to look at what we expect to have in the future and plan for that. Otherwise, every single project is going to require a general plan amendment. We don't want that necessarily. Did that answer the question?
I think so, but I think if I understand it right, the way pre-entitlement was used, it would mean that any time the county designated for residential development or community center or whatever, ground it as now a cattle ranch, somebody could say, that's a pre-entitlement.
Yes, someone could say that.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions of Peter?
Not for me.
Okay. So I think we'll start at the top of the list here with Castle and Cook, Copper Valley.
Good morning. My name is Dave Haley, representing Castle and Cook. We're here to talk about three projects, first of which is Copper Valley Ranch, a 4,350 acre proposed project. APN's 53-020-04, 53-020-05, 53-020-08, and a portion of 53-021-05. I don't know if Peter wants to outline the 4,300 acres or not.
Are you looking for that now, Peter?
I just was pointing out, it's generally this area here.
Oh, okay.
Correct. The current County General Plan 1996 designates Copper Valley Ranch as future single-family residential. Land use map number 4 designates Copper Valley Ranch as resource production. In July of 2006, Castle and Cook submitted applications for the county and paid all fees for a master project area, general plan amendment, specific plan, mixed-use zoning for 2,400 clustered residential units with commercial uses, 20 plus 10-year development agreement, along with tentative subdivision map for 1,770 acres of the 4,350 acres. The Copper Valley Ranch plan includes a 450-unit senior community, 84 acres of public parks, several miles of public hiking and biking trails, and the only public launching ramp to Lake Tulloch from Calaveras County. Approximately one half or more of the total property will remain in permanent open space. March 2007, the county deemed our application complete. July 2007, county adopts Tuscan Hills General Plan Amendment conditioned on their secondary access connecting to Copper Valley Ranch road circulation. September 2007, Planning Director Stephanie Moreno sent a letter to Supervisor Russ Thomas to have the Copper Community Plan Committee review the north-south collector road as part of the Copper Community Plan environmental document in order to maintain consistency with the adopted mitigation measures of Tuscany Hills. This road is a major collector road that extends through Copper Valley Ranch. In May of 2008, County held their TAC meeting, which is a Technical Advisory Committee, to review Copper Valley Ranch progress and provide direction to the applicant on the specific plan and environmental work. The County TAC Committee includes senior representatives from all county departments. September 2008, County completes their several traffic studies, culminating in identifying a road circulation that includes a preferred alignment for the major collector road for Copper Valley Ranch and Tuscany Hills. March 2009, the Copper Planning Committee that was supervised by the County Planning Department and supervisors submitted the Copper Community Plan to the Board of Supervisors that included the Copper Valley Ranch as specific plan for 2,400 units. The property is also included in the Copper Community Plan boundary between Highway 4, Lake Tulloch, Gopher Ridge to the west, and the range of hills east of O'Byrne's Ferry Road. That was identified in the community plan draft. In May of 2009, County Planning Director informs Castle and Cook that the county will delay further processing of Copper Valley Ranch and other general plan amendment applications until it completes its ongoing general plan update due to the continued pressures from CSERC and the Sierra Club on the lack of a legally defensible general plan. November 2010, CCWD incorporates Copper Valley Ranch 2,400 units into its water and sewer master plan. The CCWD water and sewer facilities are directly adjacent to Copper Valley Ranch. We have completed all the Copper Valley Ranch environmental studies for a cost in excess of $3 million. Due to the time delay for the ongoing general plan update, additional costs will be necessary to update these studies. The proposed land use map number 4 downgrades the land use designation to resource production. This designation is contrary to all previous county landowner discussions and directions. Resource production will add substantial delays, entitlement costs, fees, along with encouraging environmental and community challenges. It also removes development flexibility for those projects that can move forward. Development timing in any community boundary such as Copperopolis is subject to the marketplace, economic cycles, government management, community input, and developer wherewithal, which includes the desire to develop. Example, Oak Canyon Ranch is entitled to develop 3,200 acres into 3,400 mixed-use development in accordance with a development agreement that expires in less than 7 years. Oak Canyon Ranch owners are now seeking a conservancy for permanent open space, which process was approved by the Board of Supervisors in July of 2016. Identifying other areas within the Copper Community Plan boundary will offer the flexibility and provide identity for road access, which will allow us to keep the country character 2-lane roads versus forcing 4-lane roads by not including other areas within the planning, other properties within the planning area. Copperopolis population, including existing and future, at the end of the complete long-term 20 to 30-year plus build-out of all areas requesting land use improvements within the Copper Community boundary will be less than 20,000. Example, Saddle Creek is building out at less than 2.0 population per unit. Saddle Creek is building out at 10,000 or 1,050 units, not the 1,650 entitled, which we're over half built out at this point. In the 2014 joint Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission meeting, it was unanimous direction given to the Planning Department to manage the majority of the future Calaveras County growth to areas below the Highway 49 corridor. Copper is the only major land area with the infrastructure and long-term plan that can adequately take this growth for economic viability of the county. A comment that was previously given by the public on the Bureau of Land Management, identification of the possible road to New Malones, which was included in the Copper Community Plan presentation. The Bureau of Land Management did make a finding that if and when the road becomes viable, that it will be considered at that time. Not that they would not consider it. Again, the project pays for all costs of the infrastructure that is required by the project. We request that the land use map number 4 designate Copper Valley Ranch 4,350 acres as future specific plan area. This designation will require the project to complete all environmental work and obtain all county development approvals. At a minimum, designate all 4,350 acres as residential/commercial mixed-use center. Thank you.
Any questions?
What is the provision for water to Copper Valley?
Pardon?
What provision is there for bringing water to Copper Valley?
It's included in the 2010 CCWD Master Plan, and that is based on the State Water Resources Board allocating 7,000 acre-feet to Copperopolis, of which less than 1.5 million is being used, and less than half of the total 7,000 will be required for a complete build-out of Copperopolis.
And what about the wastewater? What provision for that?
Wastewater is also in their master plan, of which one of the storage ponds is on Copper Valley Ranch property.
Thank you.
Access for running the wastewater from that area to the current wastewater treatment plant. What was stated in the provision for that?
There's an ongoing discussion with CCWD of a land exchange between Saddle Creek and CCWD for the immediate strip of land between the storage ponds, existing storage pond 6, and the future storage pond on Copper Valley Ranch that's identified. And once that discussion is culminated, there will be direct access to CCWD for the sewer flow.
But that discussion has not culminated at this time.
That discussion has not culminated yet. It is part of the master plan, though, and identified route of the sewer line.
You brought up Saddle Creek, and I believe the number you said is you have 1,750 home sites left to build out in Saddle Creek?
No, there's 1,650 entitled units. We're building out at 1,050 units, of which 700 have been constructed to date.
So does that mean 600 are unbuildable?
No, we just have not developed those based on the timing of the marketplace.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is with Saddle Creek, you still have a whole lot of build out left there. Are any of those on county water or sewer, or are those septic?
It's all on county water and sewer. And when you say there's a lot left to build out, they are a certain style of home site based on a golf course community. Copper Valley Ranch is not a golf course community. It's more public-oriented parks and trails. And considering the 450 senior community and other types of development we plan on Copper Valley Ranch that's in our specific plan application, we're offering to the marketplace a different type of land unit.
Okay, and on that acreage that we were talking about under the Copper Valley Ranch, you said a lot of it would not be built out?
I'm sorry.
You said a large portion of that space would not be built out?
Over 50% of the land will be kept in open space.
So instead of it being 4,300 acres that we're looking at, you're looking at what, 2,100, 2,200?
Developable properties within the 4,350, the ribbons of open space throughout the community to keep its natural character as best we can.
And you've done environmental reports, obviously, because you said you've spent over $3 million on this?
Yes, plus now, because of the delay, we'll have additional cost.
Okay, and critical habitat areas, do you have issues with that in that land? Is that the reason for your open space?
No, but it could be considered part of. We just planned on open space to keep the character of the neighborhood in a country character. Example, the hillsides and that type of thing be kept in an open space.
How big were these lots?
Well, they range in clustering. The 450 senior community goes from independent care to assisted living to full nursing congregate care. So those unit types would obviously be substantially smaller. The majority of the rest of them were 85 by 110 foot clustered lots.
I'm just looking at the staff notes here. It says that there was no CEQA completed, and that you're saying there was $3 million worth of environmental work. What's the...
Yeah, we were completed with all of our studies and planned on moving forward until we were told of the delay.
So you're saying you did the work, but it was never submitted to the county? So the county's
correct.
not done any CEQA on this project?
The county has not. We have done all the CEQA work, reviewed it with the TAC committee, got additional input, further did some more CEQA studies, and are waiting to be heard after we paid all of the fees to the county for all applications and did all the environmental work.
The other question is, you mentioned the 2010 CCWD master plan, but I believe Mr. Mills said there's a 2015 or 2016 master plan now?
There could be one that's done after that. I'm familiar with copies of the 2010 master plan that included our project.
Do you know if the updated plan includes your project?
I think Dennis would have to speak to that.
Okay, maybe we'll ask him.
And this, I guess,
Is there another question?
the plans that you guys were working on, did you address impacts on the roads for increased traffic in those areas?
Yes, we did. And as Peter mentioned, the project will pay for all road impacts as they will for sewer and water. And it's important to note that by identifying these other areas within the community plan boundary as developable areas, it not only offers flexibility, but allows us to identify secondary access roads that we can keep all roads 2 lanes in lieu of going 4 lanes. By not including these projects within the boundary, it forces 4-lane roads because you don't include all areas at the time of the plan, at the time the plan is being prepared.
Currently, what is the access road on that?
It's Little John Road is the secondary access through Tuscany Hills, and the primary road is the road that identified by the county from Copper Cove at Little John through the Vineyard Estates property and around the back of Saddle Creek. That was the road I was talking about that the county did several studies on to identify the preferred alignment for Tuscany Hills entitlements and Copper Valley Ranch.
Thank you.
I'd like to just correct that. This is not a county proposal. This is the applicant's proposal. We've looked at it and analyzed it to see if it would work, but this is not the county's proposal. This is a road that would connect around here and come through the project here and down, and then connect, circulation through
So
there.
that's a proposed road to Oak Canyon area?
Yes.
Well, let me offer my clarification to that. The county initiated in 2007 and 2008, 14 meetings managed by 2 supervisors, county council, planning director, and public work director to identify an access road alignment to the south. And that's based on the Tuscany Hills entitlements. And we participated in those meetings and agreed to their preferred alignment, and since bought property to allow that to happen. So it was county initiated, and we did participate, but it wasn't initiated by us.
Would there be any direct access from Highway 4 other than through Little John?
Not as, I don't see that now that Oak Canyon Ranch is not going to be developed, not necessary.
So the access will be Little John coming down from Highway 4
Correct,
and Copper Cove Drive coming off of Burns Ferry Road.
correct.
Any other questions right now?
Might be able to come back to them a little bit.
Definitely. Thank you.
I'll come back and talk about the other 2 projects, Sawmill. and-
Sure. So is there someone in the audience that would like to address the Planning Commission on Copper Valley project? Land use request.
John Buckley, CSERC. I'm going to be really brief, but there's a lot of points that could be shared at, but we're not here to discuss whether or not a project should be approved. We're here to discuss whether or not it's appropriate for the land use designation. As background, I've met twice with Dave over the years at his property or at his office. I've met with him at the county here for a session with the planning director. I've met with him for lunch, and through all of them, he has been very eloquent in his vision for if you build it, they will come to the Copperopolis area. In 2012, at one of the Copper Community Plan sessions that were held in downtown Copperopolis, Dave provided the Copper Valley handout for new residential use and commercial business. And he says, he writes, the following is a conservative estimate. Residential units are estimated to increase by 11,000 units from the existing 2,400 to total 13,500 units. Incorporating this long-range planning period, residential growth will bring the total Copper population to 30 to 32,000. Build out of the projected new 11,500 residential units is likely to take 25 to 30 years, and talks about that being within the time horizon of the current long-range general plan. And on the second page, he says, considering the above, a conservative projection for annual new housing growth in the Copper Valley is 500 units per year. That was 3 years ago. Obviously, both before and afterwards, that is not reality, and the vision of having so many units is not reality. It was brought up about Saddle Creek, and it's a really important example. As you look at this area and you hear all of these land use designation requests, I was part of the Saddle Creek approval process. Originally, it was approved in 1994 with entitlements for 1,650 lots. Dave and Saddle Creek believe that they have the opportunity for 525 of those lots entitlements to be transferred elsewhere. But when he handed this out in 2012, only 585 lots had been constructed and only 300 homes built. And when he was talking about today a far higher number, I think he was talking about lots constructed and not homes built. I think there's still less than 400 homes built out of 1,650 approved lots for that project. What's important is the difference between hearing a vision from a development company who's all about development and what is realistic in terms of expecting growth. And part of that ties to road and road access for this property. I will bring you a very different version. I urge you again to look in your records and your files for the so-called conditioning approval of a secondary access through Copper Valley Ranch for Tuscany Hills. That is just not accurate. The Tuscany Hills project is approved, and our center fought to not have access allowed in through it into the area that was the proposed Copper Valley Ranch, but we did not prevail, and there is a road that extends down through Tuscany Hills that does allow access. But there was no limit condition that Tuscany Hills somehow has to either not be built or be constrained. If there's not some secondary access provided, it was simply to allow, because Dave and others were wanting to make sure they had access at least through one road. They do have access to that road, but there is no road access on, around, back up through. And you have some people here, I believe, who can speak to it. There was an apparent attempt after the Oak Canyon Ranch project, which I have a map right here of showing absolutely no road through into the Copper Valley area. There's no road out through the south end of Oak Canyon Ranch at all, partly because our center worked to get that belt as an open space or as an area for wildlife biological mitigation, which the developers agreed to. But after it was approved, there never has been any CEQA for a road down through that side that Dave has described as a north-south route. And because of things that have changed, the Vineyard Estates project, which will be coming up and be talked about, is now their goal to have a road that has never had any CEQA analysis or never had any growth inducement analysis of what it would provide to be put through that particular project site. So right now, what you have is this large property that is a ranch that has a single dead-end road to it and needs to be considered in light of, is there a demand or need? And if you simply look at what this one project would provide in terms of growth and your attempt to validate the excess growth that is already spread across the entire county, but also is already present in this particular area, not counting this project, I simply asked you to look at whether or not it will burden or benefit your general plan process. So our center strongly urges that you follow the advice of county staff on this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Infacino, Calvert Planning Coalition. I want to call your attention to the third page of the letter that I sent you, the email I sent you, because this is a really good example of what I was talking about on that third page. If you do intend to approve some of the large proposals in Copperopolis today, please consider doing so with sufficient specificity to allow for proper environmental review during the general plan EIR. What does he mean by that? Well, here's a good example. The proposal here is to, or at least from the staff report, it appears that you're taking 4,000 acres and putting them in community center. Community center allows for up to 20 dwelling units per acre. So looking just at the land use designation, you'd see there's a potential for 80,000 units. Now, the developer is not asking for 80,000 units. So how about we not designate the land for 80,000 units? How about we not do an environmental review for 80,000 units? So I'm the developer suggesting he's looking at 2,400 units. We need to find, and this goes to an issue that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where he said some of these designations create such a huge range, the projects don't seem to fit right into them. There are lots of ways you can deal with this. One suggestion I had in the letter was to put some unit number limit on the designation. So instead of just saying community center, it would be community center dash, 2400, which we would say, we recognize that in order to fit this in, we're calling it community center, but no one's expecting to designate it for more than 2,400 units. Some way so that we can, when it gets time for Peter to do the EIR, we're not looking at community center 80,000 units. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I might just point out this discussion about density. I was talking to Russ, my name is Jack Cox from the Lake
Thank
Tulloch
you.
Alliance. The city of Modesto has about the same wood footprint as Copperopolis. We're talking about 30,000. Russ used to be on the planning commission down there. We're talking about an area the size of Modesto with 30,000 people, not millions, or hundreds of thousands. So we're not talking about a huge burden. But more importantly, I want to direct myself specifically to this proposal. One concern that we have as the Lake Tulloch Alliance is how the lake is used. Dave mentioned an access road, a ramp to the lake. I think there needs to be some limitation. When we work with Tuscany Hills to get that approved, we supported that approval, is they put a limitation of a total of 27 boats that could be on the lake at one time, because right now the sheriff's office projects about 116 boats could be on the lake at one time. We've counted as many as 180. And then we had this accident the other day. We've had other accidents. So I think in your approval of this, there needs to be some consideration. But I want to rise and say, as the only person who's spoken so far representing an organization, I'm the only one that lives in Copperopolis. And frankly, I'm sick and tired of environmental organizations coming into our community and telling us what we want. I've had a house there for 21 years. I moved from Los Angeles. We love this area. My father-in-law used to be the constable of Alpine County. We need an opportunity to grow. Castle and Cook has put over $100 million into Copperopolis, $100 million. We have Coppertown Square. It's enriched our lives with entertainment and facilities and shopping. None of that would be there if they hadn't invested it. And I think the time has come, what this is pointing out, these organizations weren't there to support us last summer when they were going to drain our lake because of crazy environmental restrictions put on by the Department of Interior and the State Water Board, and we were able to stop that thanks to the support of this community. But I think this kind of a project, they're the ones risking the money, they're the ones risking the time, and for people to try to plan and dictate how many homes are going to be there is nuts. It's craziness. The market's going to have to do that. We need to protect those natural resources that ought to be protected, but let the market decide this, not allow some bureaucrats or environmental organizations that have no relationship to our community, don't live in our community, dictate how we want to live. So I'm here, even though I've voiced concerns to Dave about some of that development. Over the years, we have fought hard to keep all those green area there, to get that designated to 20-acre parcels. It's improved the area. We don't have another poker flat going up the lake. So these have been good things. We can work together as a community, but I would encourage the Planning Commission to work with our community. Our Copperopolis community plan was put together by people in Copperopolis. So listen to us. Don't let people from the outside dictate to you how we want to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, Colleen Platt again. It's a little bit scary to come up after that. I don't live in the area, but I still feel that we have valid comments we can make sometimes. I wanted to address the cost for road situation. I believe Lisa mentioned that developers would pay all the costs for infrastructure and roads, and Mr. Haley said the project will pay for all the impacts. And I don't think that's exactly the right interpretation of how our mitigation programs for infrastructure improvements work. For example, on the road benefit basins, they do cost studies for road improvements. In fact, I have some communications here with the Public Works directors over the years, and the Copper Benefit Basin, which is 2002 is when that was developed, and it was developed because of the Saddle Creek project. There was no benefit basin before Saddle Creek. So it was developed with that project in mind, and the costs and the road improvements were just for that project. They were Little John Road and Reed's Turnpike and possibly some shoulders on O'Byrne's Ferry Road. And the costs for to pay into the benefit basin are $1,271 per home if you live in the area. That's what you pay into that benefit basin for roads. But obviously that hasn't been improved since then. We've been going back and forth with Public Works about when are the costs going to be updated for our benefit basins, not just Copper, but Valley Springs. I've been here talking to you about Valley Springs. We have the same problem. So they have been doing studies over the years on all these, proposed projects, and the way that Public Works has explained it to us is they do traffic analysis on these new projects. They get a new list of road projects needed to mitigate all the cumulative impacts of all of these projects that are planned for that area. Then they come up with a new list of costs, and then they analyze what the fair share for this new development is. Fair share is the critical term here. They are not paying for all of the improvements needed. They're paying their fair share for the improvements needed. The balance of the costs for these road projects needed is going to be borne by the rest of us. So they never pay 100%. I don't know what it is. It's 10, 20, whatever their fair share of that project is determined. So I just want to, and I think that goes for all infrastructure improvements. There's always something that gets put in by the rest of us too. The developers don't pay 100% for these improvements. So, so basically, I guess my takeout is the more huge developments that you are allowing in that area, the more road improvements that will be needed. They've already done traffic studies, as they've alluded to. They've already come up with new proposed benefit basins, but they can't adopt them until the Copperopolis Community Plan is completed, until the general plan update is completed. They can't update these benefit basins. But when they do, what they will include is everything that you have said can go forward. They have to study all those projects. They have to include all of these road improvements that'll be necessary. The fees will increase. In fact, the last time they came forward in 2007, they tried to increase the fees, and there was a lot of pushback from the developers that were going to have to pay for them in this area because they were going to be levied for the cost of their projects, and they didn't like the cost. So there is going to be increases in fees for everybody. Everybody that builds in that area, not just a new subdivision, but every new home that builds there after this benefit basin is updated, every new home, the fees will be doubled because already that's what they were proposing in 2007, and that was 7 years ago. That was just for your basic residential home. In some areas, we're going to pay more. So this does have impacts on the rest of the people in the area and the rest of the vacant lots and the homes to be built, and developers do not pay all of the costs of the roads. They pay only their fair share, which is only fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yes, I'd like to offer a few comments on what was
Sure.
said by the previous speakers. Mr. Buckley was referring to a 2012 report that I gave to the Copper Community Plan that talked about the long-term growth of the Copper Valley planning area. At that time, we was projecting 30 to 32,000, and that was based on a county projection of 2.4 population per unit. Since that period of time, in 2013, a revised report was given to the county and the Copper Community Plan Committee that included a population of 24,000, and that was based on Oak Canyon Ranch being included, and a population of 2.0 per unit, mainly because it's a lot of second homes and older population, and the historical development or build out of Saddle Creek is 1.8 people per unit. The The build-out today is in excess of 400 homes that have been built. There was a comment of what was that exactly. Again, I'd like to point out in a letter from the planning director to the Copper Community Plan Committee in September of 2007 that stated in part that the Copper Community Planning Committee review the North-South Collector Road as part of the Copper Community Plan environmental document in order to maintain consistency with the adopted mitigation measures for Tuscany Hills. That is the exact verbiage in the letter. As for roads that Ms. Platt talked about, the Copper Benefit Basin was not brought about by Saddle Creek. It was an extension of the Reed's Turnpike Benefit Basin that started at approximately the year 2000. Had nothing to do with Saddle Creek. Saddle Creek did pay 100% of the cost for the Little John Road extension. Most of the road improvements will be paid by the project. Some of the basin fee will pay for some additional roads, and we will pay our fair share. But in order for development to occur, we have in the past paid for these roads and worked out a reimbursement agreement to get paid back if and when other projects get built. So our projects have been paying the 100% of the cost. In addition to the basin fees, there is the rim fees that benefit the entire county by each permit issued within the Copper area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vicki Mills. The thing I want to speak to is the fact that the Copper Valley plan, which is marked on the community plan as a specific plan, is addressing something that this county desperately needs, and that is more senior housing, period, at every level. This county is constantly sending its older people elsewhere because we don't have enough of the types of senior housing we need. So you are having to travel to Modesto or wherever you can get them in for that type of housing instead of staying in county. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I did just want to follow up with Mr. Mills. Do you know if this project is in your 2015 or 2016 master plan? I was just wondering because Mr. Haley mentioned the 2010. Could you just let him slide in there for a moment? We'll get right to you.
None of the proposed projects are delineated in the master plan or the urban update in 2015, so you can't go there and specifically address a project. However, in the plan, it does speak to the demands of future growth, not only based upon Department of Finance projections, by the way, but also on DWR projections. So we didn't just use one, we interpolated between the two to find what is going to be the best to determine whether or not we have the capacity to meet the future demands, not only for water but for wastewater. But the plan is very specific in the Copperopolis area and that community as to what we are, CCWD is capable of providing. And I would just ask to refer to that plan and be familiar with it as you go forward with the decisions on the community plan for that area, because it will help to drive, I think, part of the decisions that you make. Thank you.
Hi, Kathy Morrissey, large property owner in Copperopolis. I am just here to voice my support for Dave Haley, Castle and Cook, The things that they have done for the community of Copperopolis have been first rate, and we are not hearing a lot of people say that. There are people who are choosing to look at this and their projections and what they'd like to do rather than the positive impact that they've had. My husband and I own 5,000 acres in Copperopolis, and we are grateful that Castle and Cook has stuck around for the last 15 years and is continuing to put money into Copperopolis despite the continued setbacks that they have seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? All right, so bring it back to the Planning Commission for discussion.
I would have another question of Mr. Haley.
Okay. Mr. Haley, could you come back up?
What land use designation are you looking for here?
We are looking for a future specific plan area because there is no mixed use master plan community designation. We are more than a single family area. So the future specific plan area would allow us to develop to a specific plan and be required to do all the environmental work and mitigations required under that specific plan. I did make mention that if that isn't reasonable, to do a residential commercial mixed use center, which is also not an existing identified use, but there is no mixed use zoning or land use designation that meets that criteria.
Well, that would be the community center designation, I think.
Well, community center then it gets up to the many, many thousands of units that you could put into a community center. We're not asking for that.
But the community center land use designation is what you're looking at as far as like sort of a mixed use, but potentially with some limitation on the number of dwelling units.
That would be acceptable, and we would be willing to have a limitation applied.
Because all we're talking about here is the land use designation.
Correct.
And we don't have a category for a future specific plan. And if we tried to do that, I think that causes us problems attempting to do a CEQA analysis because we don't have any idea what that entails. If it's just that designation. And so perhaps what we're looking at from your perspective is community center with perhaps some limitation on the number of units. Does that sound?
That would be acceptable.
I think it may also be possible that we could add a land use designation, such as what Mr. Haley suggested. It might also fit some of the other sites if you're inclined to, allow some development, but, obviously with some limitations. I think that Mr. Infacino suggested, adding a limitation. So if that's something you're inclined to do, we could clearly create another land use designation that looks at these large tracts of land. It's different than some of the smaller infill community center designations we've had, say in McCollum Hill or in Murphy's or someplace like that. This is quite different, and I think to narrow the focus and scope of environmental analysis, we would need to know, okay, we got 2,400 units, but how many acres? You said mixed use. How many acres of commercial development is also proposed as part of that? Somehow identify that so that the environmental analysis clearly looks at the full potential impact of a project, a future project.
To comment on that, we have included in our applications the exact acreage and unit counts for all residential and mixed use and commercial, so that would be easy to supply. And again, I'd like to mention that Castle and Cook has paid its fees and done all the applications according to county requirements, and have been doing the process at county direction through the TAC meetings, and have been only delayed because of the inadequacies of the general plan. We're here to stick through it, and we understand situations, and we would like to be able to proceed with our project. Thank you.
Okay, one more question. If the commission were to accept the staff recommendation of resource production for Copper Valley. Can you tell us what you envision in terms of additional expense or delay or difficulties that would entail?
Yes, as I mentioned, the resource production would add, it would take us back in our environmental reviews to do a whole nother layer of analysis. It would offer the community and the environmental community, fodder to make comments that are adverse to our application. And resource production is a land use that allows for people. It's a cattle grazing and open space category, and that is completely contrary to our fees that we paid and our entitlement, our environmental documents that we have been doing and will have to update over the next period of time.
But do you agree with the planning director that an environmental analysis looks to what is on the ground now? And I take it there's no development on the ground now, correct?
No, it's only an existing land use designation of future single family.
So wouldn't your environmental analysis down the road have to compare what it is that you want to do with what's on the ground now, which is nothing, no matter what land use designation you have?
That is correct, and that's what our environmental documents have been doing. But again, it's all based on our ability to develop the property with a future land use designation that allows development, not in reverse that does not allow development.
Is it fair to suggest that what's really going on here is that if you get a land use designation, call it community center with some limit on the number of units now, then there will be some environmental analysis by the county based upon that, and you will not have to worry about the environmental community suggesting or litigating a change from a general plan designation.
That is correct. But keep in mind, in addition to the county and their environmental work, the project does specific environmental work as relates to impacts by the project and would require to mitigate all those impacts paid for by the project.
So one of your concerns would be if you go to resource production and then you come back with a plan that you've had for many, many years, there may be people out there who would use that as ammunition against your project.
No question about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion?
Is public closed? And then back here?
Yes, we're back here.
Okay. Because there's so many projects with big plots of land with Castle and Cook, I would like to have all of those hearings before we make decisions on each individual one, if we could. Just because then we have more information in front of us on each plot of land and how each one's going to impact each area. So if we could have him present all of his cases before we make any definite decisions on each one, it would be helpful, I think.
That's fine with me. Yeah,
Sounds good.
okay. So do you want to take a short recess, and then Mr. Haley, you could start with one of your other projects, and so we'll recess until 10:55. Back in session. Mr. Haley, would you like to discuss the 266.9 acre request?
I would suggest being consistent with the Copper Valley Ranch project that I do Vineyard next.
Whichever
and then
you'd like to do, that would be fine.
Thank you. Vineyard
Vineyard.
Vineyard Estate is a 40-acre project. It's APN 055-051 and 010, with adjustments to road circulations to APN 055-044, 004-001 and 055-005-001.
And Peter, could you point that out again on your,
So this is the property here in question, these two
Okay.
large parcels. There's also part of the project included these two lots here as far as extending or connecting road to,
It's just a portion of that green area that Peter was highlighting. It's there's, yes,
that's the 40 acres.
that's correct.
okay.
Who owns the rest of it?
The fireman, Karen Fireman died, so I'm not quite sure what
Okay,
entity owns it.
But you guys don't own it? It's
No.
not, okay.
So I think this is an area that might be considered as potential infill. You know, we do have, Oak Canyon Ranch, the conservation easement, this area here, but we've got high-density residential as part of the specific plan, or low-density residential, and then rural residential, 1 acre parcels along here. So there's some logic to perhaps increasing some of the density, whether it's just this parcel or both parcels, having a small pocket of resource production, although when the conservation easement is finalized, this will be going to resource production as well. So what's the transition between this area and that area? Worthy of discussion.
The Vineyard Estates 40 acres is currently in the 1996 general plan designated as residential center. Land use map number 4 designates Vineyard Estates as resource production. Between 2007 and 2008, the county held 14 meetings with 2 supervisors, planning director, public works director, county council, and Oak Canyon Ranch, Tuscany Hills, and Copper Valley Ranch owners to establish a road access alignment to the southern area of the Copper community boundary, as I mentioned on the Copper Valley Ranch project. In April of 2007, County Public Works created a concept of the major collector road from the south Copper area to connect to Little John Road at Copper Cove. This required the land purchase of the 40-acre Vineyard Estates and the southeast corner lot of the Copper Cove community. In February 2008, Castle and Cook purchased this 40 acres based on those discussions. In June of 2008, Castle and Cook submitted an application and paid county fees for Vineyard Estates 17 lot tentative subdivision map and change of location for the Saddle Creek second entrance from Bow Drive at Little John to Copper Cove at Little John. In August of 2008, the county deemed Vineyard tentative subdivision map complete. November 2010, Castle and Cook submitted to county the Vineyard Estates draft initial study mitigating negative deck. April 2012, County Council accepts Vineyard Estates access as independent utility. This allows the southern extension of the major collector road to be bifurcated from the environmental review with Vineyard Estates and Saddle Creek only. What that meant was, in lieu of doing the environmental work from Copper Valley Ranch all the way to past Saddle Creek and to the corner of Copper Cove, it allowed us to deal with only the Saddle Creek entrance and Vineyard Estates, as the road had independent utility for those projects and they were a standalone project. In April of 2012, Tom Garcia, then Public Work Director, informs Castle and Cook to purchase Copper Cove southeast corner lot at the Copper Cove Drive and Little John Road to gain his support for a revised intersection with a 4-way intersection without a peanut or offset roundabout that was currently under review. In March of 2015, Castle and Cook withdrew the Vineyard Estates development applications due to the county desire to work with Copper Cove HOA on road access through the 2 lots for the independent utility of the Saddle Creek second entrance. Castle and Cook requests that the land use map number 2 designate the 40-acre Vineyard Estate land as rural residential, RR, or residential low density, RLD. We intend to resubmit the Vineyard Estates tenant subdivision map upon adoption of the ongoing general plan update. We also will continue to pursue the approval with the county of the Saddle Creek second entrance relocation to Copper Cove Drive at Little John from Bow Drive at Little John. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Haley?
Yes, your proposal earlier was to create 17 lots, is that right?
That's correct.
And is that still what you have in mind?
That's correct.
And so would rural residential suit that project?
Yes. Shall I move on to the sawmill?
Any
or-
other questions? No, let's invite the public up. Let's do that next.
Pardon?
Mr. Haley, we'll invite other people
Oh, okay.
to
I'm sorry.
comment on your request. Is there anyone that would like to address the planning commission on this land use designation request for?
Yes, just a question, Colleen Platt. The land use being requested is RLD, is that correct?
That's what it says.
That's what it says on the chart.
Yeah, but
And that's 6 units per acre, 240 lots for that size parcel.
He's requesting, standing up here, to go to rural residential, which would be
Okay.
1 to 5 acre parcels.
I just wanted to clarify that that's
Yeah.
what you would be considering, not the RLD, because 240 units is a little
Yeah,
bit
he
more than
said RR.
17. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Oh, sorry.
John Buckley again for CSERC. On the last matter, Mr. Cox attacked environmentalists as dictating how we would live and being outsiders. I just wanted to clarify that I'm speaking here today on more than 200 families from Calaveras County who expect us to stand up and be their representatives. You may not agree with us, but we're representing Calaveras County members, and I would much rather be someplace else, but I'm here today because that's what I'm being expected to do. So I try and do it with respect for other points of view. The other is Mr. Cox very stridently called it crazy to attempt a plan for expected growth, but that happens to be what you are mandated by the state to do in this process, and is what the planning staff and others are directing and trying to do. So I just point that out. Our center has never objected to the amount of lots that might be created on this site, but you should, before you finalize things and pass them on to the Board of Supervisors, you should talk to Tom Garcia, who was mentioned here, who provided, Kelly, I believe you may have been there at those meetings, a different perspective as to the concern about growth inducement for a road access through this parcel at this point, and what that might do in terms of inviting litigation and other things for that particular area. So all I ask you to do is please try to contact Mr. Garcia on that particular matter to get clarification about the growth inducement aspect of not the lots, but of the road that was tied to this. And I think a little clarification is Dave shared that Tom told him to purchase. I believe the way I understood it is the county explained that they wouldn't be able to even process it unless Castle and Cook owned that small portion across the road. It's a little different than telling them to go to buy it, which is what it made it sound like in the way of his description. I think it was clarification. They couldn't evaluate it unless there was support for the widened area by whoever owned that property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My Jack Cox, the Lake Telec Alliance. I am not against planning. I'm saying to provide flexibility in your zoning to allow the market to determine this as opposed to having to go back and go through the kinds of things that Dave's talking about. I'm absolutely for planning. We have been involved with these issues on Lake Telec for 20 years or more. So just for the record, that's exactly what we support what you're doing. It's important to do that. We need to set aside certain areas that ought to never be developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, is there anyone else before Mr. Haley comes back up? Thank you, Mr. Haley.
Hi, Melinda Hoff. I have a question for Mr. Haley, if it's okay.
Well, you can ask it of us. and
Okay,
then-
I can
yeah.
ask it of you, and Dave
And
can
then- and
answer.
he'll
I just want,
respond.
it's just real quick. I just want to know, I know the lot was purchased directly across, but still, I'm confused on how that would feed back into the two-lane Copper Cove, because it still doesn't allow straight-through access. And second, where do you stand with the Copper Cove Homeowners Association on the matter?
I'm sure he'll address your questions when he comes up.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else before Mr. Haley comes back up? No. Okay. Mr. Haley?
I'd like to just comment on Mr. Buckley's comment on Tom Garcia. To be clear, from our perspective, we have been going through 9 different public work directors and 9 different planning directors through this process of these projects. And during the Tom Garcia public work director phase, we were analyzing an offset intersection that's called a peanut roundabout, where you come in at one bulb and exit from another bulb in kind of a peanut shape. That was what was going through the county directed LSC, which is, I can't remember what LSC stands for, but it's the company that the county was using for road analysis. During that period of time, Tom Garcia got uncomfortable with the peanut roundabout concept and recommended, maybe didn't instruct us to buy it, but said he would not support the peanut roundabout, and he would only support a direct four-way intersection, which would go through that corner lot. So that's what necessitated the purchase of that corner lot. As to the Belinda Hoff's comments on the Copper Cove HOA, at the request of Mr. Maurer, we have been meeting with the Copper Cove HOA. We have not made a formal application. We've been in preliminary discussions with the Architectural Review Committee and their board of directors. They are opposing doing any realignment of that intersection. And we think that with the county assistance and ourselves, that we should be able to make those adjustments as Saddle Creek second entrance exiting on Little John Road 2,000 feet up on Bow Drive puts an extra burden on Little John Road. It doesn't even make sense. You can't physically get from Saddle Creek to Bow Drive due to topography. So the secondary entrance does not work, and Saddle Creek needs a secondary entrance. Therein lies this independent utility of us exiting Saddle Creek to the north and going through that intersection. The 2 lots will still remain as in single-family, one unit per lot. And the reason why we could still do that and get the road alignment through it is we will construct and tie into the Saddle Creek sewer system a public sewer, so we don't have a requirement for septic. I think that was, I might have missed one question that Melinda had, but I can't remember it. Sorry.
Dave, so when you're describing what you just described, it seems to me that you have access issues trying to accomplish what you want. Do you need to purchase more land to do this?
No.
Are you looking at eminent domain? How are you going to accomplish this access?
Well, if we can't get the Copper Cove Association to agree to it, one of the issues of an association is their CC&Rs allow a lot sizing adjustment so we could physically do what we're asking for, but because the HOA board controls the CC&Rs, excuse me, the CC&Rs, we might need to, in order to get past that hurdle, an eminent domain against our own properties, so we can get the road access through and still remain as a single-family lot. But again, it's not causing hardship on anybody else's property, it's only our own. And
why would you have to do an eminent domain on your own property? Why can't you give legal access?
well, if there is a desire from the county to get Copper Cove Board to approve this, and there's 3 board members that just don't like the concept of additional roads or growth, how do you get past that hurdle?
Okay, well, you know that I'm all for growth, but you also would know that I wouldn't sit still for eminent domain procedures. I see an access issue here for as many homes as you're wanting to develop, and I mean, without putting due pressure on a homeowners association that's established, that access issue is of concern.
Well, keep in mind, we're dealing with an access necessity for the southern end of the Copper Valley boundary. The road that was previously proposed went all the way from the south boundary to Highway 4, which is $37.5 million, plus eminent domain on about 10 different parcels, that are adjacent to Highway 4, which was completely out of the picture. So the Public Works Department came up with this concept of tying into Copper Cove at Little John.
Okay, well, I can understand the concept if the homeowners association had voted and said, yeah, let's do this, great idea, great plan, but then that puts a lot of pressure on their roads in their subdivision and their homeowners. Can you point what you're discussing and talking about there on the map?
I'm a little concerned we're getting off topic here. We're not really talking about a project, we're talking about a land use designation, and I'm actually concerned that we may be violating the Brown Act by talking about details of a project that's not before you, not on your agenda. Just in general purposes, the proposal is to connect a road at this point through the property and connect to Saddle Creek, as well as extend it to the west for potential future access down through the Oak Canyon Ranch to the Copper Valley area.
Okay, so
there are some physical design constraints to that intersection that is being talked about, as far as the eminent domain and the roundabout and the various types of intersections. So
I guess so not to be beating a dead horse on that, but when we're being asked to give a land designation, that issue is real important in that decision-making process for me.
I think the larger question of circulation and access to these larger tracts of land is certainly pertinent to the discussion today.
It is.
The specifics of the design of that intersection and whether the homeowner association has the authority to block the design, I think that's getting a little too far afield for what we're talking about today.
Okay.
But certainly talking about how are we going to access this area down here if we designate it for future higher intensity uses is definitely a general plan issue.
Okay.
And keep in mind, and comment on that, we've bifurcated the extension of that road. We're only talking about access to the 40 acres and the secondary access to Saddle Creek. We're not talking anything past that.
Got it.
Dave, does this Vineyard Estates border Little John?
No, there is one Copper Cove lot in between. That's part of one of the 2 lots that we're talking about allowing a road access through a single-family lot and keeping it in a single-family lot, just resizing it. And again, that relocating from Bow Drive down 2,000 feet is a necessity to get a secondary entrance to Saddle Creek. You physically can't do it at Bow Drive, which was thought up in 1994, but it just didn't work.
Any other questions on this?
No.
All right, do you want to move then to
Sawmill
Former
Lake.
Sawmill?
Sawmill Lake is a 247-acre project that was revised to 227 acres by eliminating a 20-acre site that was part of the Copper Cove community. It involves APNs. There's a whole series of them. I don't know if you want me to read them all off, but it's if you do, it's...
No, that's okay. I think we've all got them right here in front of us.
Okay, thank you. The current 1996 general plan designates the majority of Sawmill Lake as agriculture A1 and a portion as residential center. Land use map number 4 designates the majority of Sawmill Lake as community center regional with the southern portion as rural residential. We agree with the proposed land use map number 4 land use designations for Sawmill Lake. The 1997 agreement between the county and landowners and the landowner required the county to redesignate all of Sawmill Lake and Coppertown Square land to community center in consideration of the Little John Road right-of-way granted by the landowner. This right-of-way was granted and the road was constructed. As part of the Town Square approved entitlements and environmental review documents, the Sawmill Lake Project water and sewer infrastructure was included, and the majority of the off-site improvements was constructed in 2007. The only off-site sewer yet to be constructed is the 6-inch force main to the Saddle Creek community. This force main was delayed at the request of CCWD and the county due to the low volume of sewer flow at the start of the Sawmill Lake Coppertown Square development cycle. In March of 2009, the Copper Planning Committee submitted the Copper Community Plan to the Board of Supervisors and identified Sawmill Lake as specific plan for 800 units, which includes 2 hotels, one of 100-unit travel units and the other 70-unit resort hotel. In November of 2010, CCWD confirms the Sawmill Lake proposed 800 units mixed uses to be incorporated in their water and sewer plan, which we have a copy of that document. In February of 2013, the Board of Supervisors denied our request, a revised request for a 580-unit general plan amendment, specific plan, zoning regulation, tentative subdivision map, and development agreement application without prejudice due to the county not having the legally defensible general plan. We intend to resubmit Sawmill Lake 580-unit specific plan and other applications upon adoption of the ongoing general plan update.
So just to clarify this, Peter, it looks, you are requesting community center, and Peter, you're recommending community center / rural residential?
Right, so the area that's closest to Little John Road and the Coppertown Square, sort of on the north and west of the lake itself, seems appropriate for some level of development.
And that's how many acres?
It split some of the properties, so I can't
Around?
remember. The report had
It's around 110.
100.
It's about half.
about half the property. So, and then the rest of it seemed to sort of fit in with the rural residential lands that are, to the east. Again, this is the northern part of the Oak Canyon Ranch future conservation easement area. So I felt it was a transition from the existing development and approved, into. Now there are some serious constraints on this site. There are a lot of environmental issues associated with the prior project. Those would still have to be worked out. Doesn't necessarily mean that the entire area would be developed, but that's something we would have to work out when a new project's submitted. or resubmitted.
So that 6-inch main that you're talking about, is that going to provide sewer to Coppertown Square? Is that going to tie into that? Well, how's that?
It provides the outflow for the sewer for the town square and Sawmill. The sewer lift station is constructed, and right now there's a holding tank on the Sawmill Lake property that we pump out of to take the sewer down to Saddle Creek. And so we need to extend that line, which we're willing to do, except we can't because there's not enough flow for the development that's existing. We're not
Can you
going
zoom
septic, so-
out and show us the direction between Sawmill Lakes there and Saddle Creek? And where that line would run?
Well, it runs, you need to go down a little bit to the south. Okay, from the Sawmill Lake community, from the Sawmill Lake community, which is here, Little John Road goes down through here, and Saddle Creek is right here. The EIR and the plan has a 6-inch force main that goes down this road and ties into the main entrance of Saddle Creek into the Saddle Creek sewer system, and it has the capacity, because we're not developing out the full 1,650 units. CCWD requested that this, besides the delay of this line because of not enough flow or else it would go septic, that they wanted to include Oak Canyon Ranch into this sewer line. And so CCWD has a concept that goes through Oak Canyon Ranch into the back of Saddle Creek. Now that Oak Canyon Ranch is not going to be developed, we propose to continue on with what's approved in the EIR to go down Little John Road when the amount of flow allows that to happen.
Other questions to Mr. Haley?
Is there a difference between what's acceptable to you and what the planning department is recommending?
No, we're in agreement. I guess the only comment that I have is community center regional versus community center local.
Community center what?
Regional versus...
It's all community center now. We combined them.
Okay, well then, community center works for us.
Thank you. Anyone would like to discuss this land use designation request for former Sawmill Lake project?
Yes, Colleen Platt again. I'd like to clarify what would be the units that would be allowed with that community center designation. The previous proposal for Sawmill Lake was 800 units, and Mr. Haley, I believe, just said he intends to resubmit as 580 units, which would be a reduction from the previous proposal. But if there's, I think I heard 110 acres of community center there, the density allowed in community center would allow a lot more units than that. It'd be 110 times, I don't know, 20 units per acre or whatever that's allowed. So, is there any way to clarify that and to do as Mr. Infusino was suggesting, that, you have something in mind as a density? You're in a very sensitive habitat area there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife wrote lots of letters back then, said that, you're way close to the creek, to the Sawmill Lake. You need to be at least 200 feet back. You're impacting a lot of things. So I understand that'll be figured out in the project when they actually submit the project. But at this point, the EIR would have to, I think, examine the full community center designation allowed on the project at 12 to 20 units per acre, unless you can do something to clarify what the actual project would be. So I know we're not supposed to be talking about projects, but again, if you're overestimating, what the developer actually wants to do on the property, that would help the EIR to clarify that. and the general plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, wait, Mr. Haley, could you, we'll get back to you.
John Buckley, CSERC again. I will emphasize that I not only have met with Dave twice on this particular project, trying to help create a project that would be less controversial, that would provide for the protection along the stream area and Sawmill Lake, and to support a project going forward. And there was a strong advocacy for things that he felt he needed, rather than being able to make adjustments that would protect the areas that were identified. And I realize that it's important because you've already heard from him in his testimony. He's planning, Castle and Cook is planning to bring forward the project. So you do have, as part of this discussion, an expectation that the project is tied to the requested land use designation. And in 2012, resolution number 2012-028, this planning commission, or the planning commission, passed a resolution denying the Sawmill project in its entirety. That's the exact wording. A resolution recommending the Board of Supervisors deny the Sawmill Lake project in its entirety, and listed, in addition to that the project and specific plan, even with the project's proposed revisions, are premature and will foreclose habitat conservation planning options in the general plan update. And that was in addition to the fact that it was premature because they're inconsistent with the current general plan. But the two items that the Planning Commission resolution also emphasizes, the Planning Commission on page 11 of 15, the Planning Commission finds there's inadequate infrastructure to serve the project. And on page 12 of 15 from resolution 2012-028, the Planning Commission finds that the design and improvements of the proposed project, even with the project applicant's proposed revisions, are likely to cause substantial environmental damage. That could change because a new project could be made in a different fashion. But when it then went before the Board of Supervisors in February 2013, the County Council and the planning staff provided a very detailed PowerPoint presentation, and it included in it a key issue that relates to land use designation. What you're considering now is Issue D, Regional Conservation Strategy. In the general plan update, further growth in Copperopolis will require policies and an implementation program for a habitat conservation plan or regional conservation strategy. Preservation of the biological resources in Sawmill Lake, referring to the Sawmill Lake project, may be essential to enable further development in the area. May be essential to enable further development in the area, because there needs to be, as the letter from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Planning Commission staff report of December 13th, 2012 spells out. Foreclosing options in the general plan, evidence in the record, including correspondence from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service of June 2010 and January 2011, describes the significance of the biological resources remaining within the open space lands of the Copperopolis planning area and at the Sawmill project site. And it goes down and it has these quotes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But it says the service has provided a firmly worded recommendation that a habitat conservation plan or regional conservation strategy be prepared and approved prior to further development in the area. And this is from your Planning Commission staff report. Approval of the project will result in the conversion of 157.9 acres of very high-quality habitat lands currently designated as natural resource lands in the general plan, and will foreclose the option of incorporating the key habitat values of those lands into the county's habitat conservation planning effort. And as was described by the planning director, having some corridor area of protected lands on this site was essential to creating something that would satisfy the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and allow development to go forward without some sort of litigation or litigation from a group like our center in support of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pointing out the inadequacy of the general plan. I'm simply pointing out that it's premature to change these acres now in a land use designation. Let your general plan be updated. You already know there's going to be a project come forward. As Kelly put out earlier, there is one of many different niches of levels of which something can be opposed by. If it takes a general plan amendment, which this would take if you wait till afterwards, it will take a general plan amendment. But it's just one of a number of things that will be assessed in an environmental impact report. Whereas if you do it now, you are burdening this general plan update with now whether or not you have lost pivotal biological resources areas by changing a land use designation that even U.S. Fish and Wildlife has identified as important to protect certain species in certain areas around Sawmill Lake, the Creek Corridor, and others. So it's a matter of timing, and it's up to you. Again, when you're inviting the applicant, what do you want? It's very clear that you're trying to be sensitive to the applicant. I get that. I'm not going to change your views on that. But in terms of our center is wanting, to the point possible, you come up with a plan that's going to be able to withstand legal scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Is there anyone before we ask Mr. So you can answer all the questions at one time.
Jack Cox, Lake Tulloch Alliance. One of the reasons this is an important project is that Lake Tulloch, we have more and more of us are moving there full-time and living there. The Coppertown Square is struggling to make it. We have one shopping center down along Burns Ferry Road. We need healthcare facilities. We need all sorts of services there. This kind of a project and building these hotels and developing this out is going to make this place, it's like I was a scoutmaster. And I taught my boys, you can't put one stick in a fire and start a fire. You need a whole bunch of sticks. And what we need is economic growth here. We need jobs and opportunity so someone can move up here and have a job and live here full time. So slowing these things down, I mean, I'm all for preserving the environment, but unfortunately, when someone brings up litigation against this thing already, what concerns me is that the public, the citizens, are left in the dirt. Yeah, I'm going to probably be dead in 20 years. So if this thing's going to go for 20 years, I'm never going to get the benefit, or my family, or other people who live there. So the point is, I would urge the Commission to also look at the realities of why we need economic growth. Yes, we're for preserving the environment, but it's got to be also put in the context of the economy and people. Okay? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ron Kopf. As we've talked about before, we're kind of getting things confused on what the difference is between a program EIR and a project EIR. We keep trying to walk to the details. You're working on a program EIR, and we keep bringing up all the details that are associated with a project EIR. We're looking at really specifics to where the environmental issues and all those things are. What a program EIR is prepared on a series of actions that can be characterized as one large project. This is under the CEQA handbook. And it says, a program EIR generally establishes a framework or tiered or project level environmental documents that are prepared in accordance with the overall program. So you're looking at a global program. By adding these other projects, you're not adding a whole ton of additional environmental analysis. You're looking at it in relation to the overall tiered project. When a project comes forward, which is the most common type of the EIR, it examines the impact that would result from the development of that specific project. Those are just definitions right out of the CEQA handbook. What you have the benefit of doing right now when you're looking at your overall general plan is you have the benefit of looking at these large projects, which then can tie in. You can figure out some of the regional road systems and other things with that That's not growth inducing. That's part of how do we connect these large projects. So how do you start linking some of your trail systems? How do you link your open space? How do you tie these different projects? That's much better than trying to do it as a bunch of little small disjointed projects that create a lot of problems down the road of trying to figure these all out. So you really do have the benefit with these large projects of being able to look at it from a global standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before Mr. Haley comes up?
I want to agree with the last speaker,
Please state your name for the record.
Tom Infacino, Calaveras
Thank
Planning
you.
Coalition. It is important to look at these things together. He was talking about the importance of looking at the projects together. It's also essential to look at the conservation efforts necessary to make the projects a reality. And it's important to look at the infrastructure necessary to make those projects a reality. At this level, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And you're supposed to be looking at feasible alternatives at the project level. What Mr. Buckley was talking about was, this may be an irreplaceable piece of your habitat conservation plan that lets all the other development go forward in Copperopolis. And what he's talking about is do not cut your nose off to spite your face with this project. And I also agree with Mr. Cox. We have to look at the future for economic development in Copperopolis. We do not want to make the mistake of throwing away the essential piece of a future network of habitat conservation that's going to make economic development in these areas possible. So while today may be just about looking at the developments and tentatively saying yay or nay, when we go back at the end of this process, like we said we're going to do, and make these final adjustments, I'm hoping that staff has some real serious proposals for how you're going to address the conservation and the infrastructure needs that you're creating with these developments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before we ask Mr. Haley back up? No?
A few comments on what was just spoken about, not just, but from the previous speakers. We would be willing to limit the community center designated area to, and including the rural residential to 580 units. When we was discussing at the last planning committee, not the last planning commission, but the planning commission and board of supervisors hearing for Sawmill Lake, we revised the land plan to respond to some of the issues of oak trees on the southern end, and that's why we came up with the 580 unit concept. So we would be willing to limit the designation of community center / rural residential to a maximum of 580 units. As to the infrastructure, the town square was approved and constructed based on Sawmill Lake being attached to it, not only for sewer and water, but for the roads. The road that goes through Coppertown Square dead ends at the end of Town Square on the southern end, and is supposed to be extended through Sawmill Lake in order for the interior road system of the town square to be legally viable. And so these were heard in conjunction too. We was going to do Sawmill and the town square together, but because of the need at the time to have a sense of place and to provide some retail component to Copperopolis, we chose to advance the town square ahead of Sawmill Lake. As to the lake itself and the environmental issues, it was comments about fish and wildlife. Sawmill Lake itself is a permitted storage lake based on Castle and Cook paying an annual fee. We don't pay the annual fee, the lake goes away. It has a specific use. So what we are doing is saying, well, let's keep the lake in perpetuity, because it does have a habitat, for example, the western pond turtle. Even though no western pond turtle has been detected, it is a habitat. And so we thought, as not only for a habitat, but for an amenity for the project to increase its value for the hotels, that we thought we would keep the lake. But again, the Sawmill Lake project goes away, the lake goes away, and it would just be a dry stream, a dry creek bed. As to, again, I'd like to remind people that we have an agreement with the county that in consideration of us dedicating Little John Road, which we did, that it would be redesignated as community center. Thank you.
Any questions of? Any questions?
No.
Period, I guess.
Well,
Mr. Haley or
I do have some questions as to,
of Mr. Haley? Or just?
in
in general.
Okay.
Go ahead.
When you talked about Sawmill Lake going away, if they so chose, how does that happen? That's beyond me. I'm not sure how that applies. I mean, Castle and Cook, it's a storage pond, he said. So, is there anything in the ordinances on that you've read that applies to that?
There's nothing that I'm aware of that would require a landowner who has a body of water on their property. It's totally privately maintained from keeping that. So there's a ranch that has a stock pond. If they decide they want to drain it, I think they can drain it. There may be Fish and Game, California Department of Fish and Wildlife rules and regulations, but nothing at the county level that I'm aware of.
Okay. And to follow up on that, I do see part of the need for downtown Copperopolis on the need for the infrastructure to run a line for sewage, as now there's a storage tank there. I guess that was pretty much already answered. I'm not sure how it would be a question. So I see part of the validity of needing that to continue the growth in the area that's copper downtown square, and actually needing a stack line where we don't have a tank that's pumped from to bring the sewage to a wastewater treatment plant. Is that correct? Is that how it's set up right now?
So my understanding is the holding tank is an interim provision for handling the sewage. It's pumped and trucked down to the treatment plant at the end of Little John Road. Ultimately, the plan would be to connect a line, a force main, along Little John Road, connect to the Saddle Creek project, and then that would then feed into the sewage treatment plant. The understanding I have is there's not sufficient, so twofold. One, the cost of that line is obviously going to be expensive, and the existing development can't support that cost. Also, what I heard was that there are operating restrictions that you need to have a certain amount of flow through the line in order that it continues to flow and it operates efficiently, and there's not sufficient effluent at this point in time to make that operation work.
So it's kind of crucial on some of the building on Sawmill to make that operable.
As planned, yes. Now, could the line be downsized to accommodate the smaller amount of development? That's possible. I'm not an expert on sewage line construction. Could they put in a small package treatment plant instead? Possible. I don't know what the costs are and how, if that is effective, cost effective to do that.
Okay, thank you.
The last time this came before the commission and the board, it included not just a general plan amendment, but a specific plan and zoning regulation and a vesting tentative subdivision map and a development agreement. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, but all we have before us now is the general plan land use designation.
Yes.
And so the environmental issues will have to be dealt with down the road, assuming that the designation is granted. They're still going to be there.
Yes. So the site-specific, the project EIR would be necessary to be done for any subsequent project that's done. The program EIR for the general plan would look at, okay, if we have 120 acres of community center at this location, what does that do programmatically, looking at the county as a whole? And the issues as far as future mitigation for natural resources, traffic circulation, infrastructure, is looked at that higher level view, not the project-specific view.
Do you have any information on when this sawmill lake was created and why?
I don't.
To follow up on that further, apparently U.S. Fish and Wildlife is aware of it as per the decision of December 12th of 2000.
Oh, yes, there was a huge amount of controversy over that project and a lot of correspondence, communication with a number of different agencies, including Fish and Wildlife Service.
Other questions? Discussion? Further discussion?
On this project or on all three of them?
I guess it depends on how, I think we should probably discuss them if we're going to be taking a vote as far as what the appropriate land use designation or we would like to recommend to the board. I would say that those need to happen separately.
It seems to me that the Vineyard Estates one and the sawmill project are not as difficult as Copper Valley. It seems to me that there seems to be substantial agreement between the planning department and Castle and Cook on Vineyard Estate and on Sawmill, but not on Copper Valley. And so it may be easier to take up the easier ones first.
So why don't we start with the smallest one?
And to follow up with those, the project EIRs would later address the environmental impacts
So
as it would be. But I would also like to bring up the possibility of the clarity of, when we go into this, community center, and how many units it could be, and defining that, like the gentleman from Castle and Cook representing right here said that he would be fine with it being limited to 580 units on for being specific on his plan for the Sawmill Lake area, and so on and so forth as we move forward.
we can discuss that option when we talk about it.
Okay.
So shall we start with the Vineyard Estates, the 40 acres? Sure. Lisa?
Staff is recommending CC and the requested land use is CC, so I don't see any discrepancies there.
No, I think that's fair. That was the Sawmill Lake. This is the project.
This is RTA, basically. I think that's what it
Okay,
should
on the-
reflect.
This
Okay,
piece here, the
so
40
they're
acres.
asking for low density and we are going 10 to 20 acre parcels.
No, I think that's a 5-acre parcels, isn't it?
RTA?
Oh, I'm sorry.
RTA is 10 to 20 acre.
So then, is it the RTA? Because it
Well,
was,
I think if I'm comfortable with either RR or RTB. We're having 40 acres. They are wanting to get 17 or 18 units on this site. That would be consistent with the RR. The maximum density would be 40 units if they're all subdivided into 1-acre parcels. There are some constraints. There's some wetland area in the center of the property where the stream goes through. I think that the design that they have proposed in the previous project is probably about what you're going to see on any project, and on the larger scale picture, whether it's 17 units or 40 units, we're talking, 20, 23 unit difference. Countywide, that's a blip. That's really, so I think a rural residential designation would, certainly fit in with the properties to the east and south. This is not part of what's being requested, and we've got future resource production to the west. I think it's a reasonable transition between what we have already in these communities and here. So
would it be all right to say RR 17?
I would hesitate to start dictating on parcels of this size what the maximum density is at the general plan level. I think it's going to create more problems, I think, in the future than just to say it's RR and let the site itself dictate how much could be accommodated for that.
But the 5 acre minimum wouldn't accommodate the 17
That would be
units.
8 parcels. So,
Yes.
And that may be, in your minds, an appropriate transition from RR to rural transition to resource production. Either one, I think, works. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on that.
Well, I guess that RR I would be hesitant, even though there are some constraints, but there's already issues with the roads. Even again, we're not talking project specific, but just since we have some sort of pre-knowledge of some of the limitations.
I don't think providing access to a 20 or 40 unit project is the same issue as access to a 200 or 2,400 unit project, and larger circulation issues associated with the Copper Valley Ranch area. And if they can't work out the circulation, then they're just not going to be able to get the project approved.
So with this particular one, I'm sort of ambivalent about it. I just, you could say it's infill. So I'm open to the commission's direction, I guess, on this, where you guys are going.
I do have one question that ties to what was just discussed. Does it help with the CEQA analysis at all to call this RR/20, say? Or is it just, these numbers are not big enough to be of concern for the CEQA analysis?
For the general plan EIR, it's not going to make a difference.
Okay.
On those larger tracks and stuff we'll probably be talking about this afternoon, I think definitely, and certainly Copper Valley, that would make a difference.
Well, I think I'm okay with this being RR. It's kind of an infill project anyway. The access and circulation will have to be dealt with later.
I would have to concur with Mr. Wooster tentatively.
Tentatively, yes. Lisa?
I'm good with RR on that one.
Okay, so I think we're tentatively a recommendation of RR. So moving to Sawmill.
CCCC. I'm good with that.
I am too, with the limitation of 580 units, if the planning director thinks that that's advisable.
I think that if we are going to start putting limitations on specific areas, we might want to come up with a different land use designation, either the future specific plan or come up with some other name that we can then sort of identify as a whole and say this specific area, the maximum capacity is going to be that much.
For me, I don't really necessarily think we need to put an end number on it because we're not doing the planning process of what's going to happen with that land today. We're saying, are we going to allow it to be developed under that land use? Those plans could change. I mean, it could be down to a 200 project.
Or they could make a 1,000 unit project work on that site. So I think that if it's critical that the impact of a large project be limited in the general plan, we come up with a designation that sort of says, we don't know exactly what the plan is, but we're allowing this to move, to be as a part of our future planning, as long as it doesn't exceed a certain amount. I think the area here, I know it's very sensitive, there's a lot of history involved, it's been very controversial. I don't think it's large enough to sort of warrant that sort of future consideration of putting some specific limits on it right now, that the project itself will be self-limiting based on what we designate it for and what the constraints are on the site. If we wanted to, we might pull back, from the lake a little bit. If we wanted to, say, okay, we really don't want to see urban development right up against the lake. There's some sensitivity issues. We could draw that line, something like this.
I think that's going to take care of itself through EIR reports anyway.
Likely,
How many acres is it total?
266.
266.
and that
And
includes
with the CC,
some of
what would
these
be
parcels
the max
back down
build
here.
on 266, 20 units per acre?
The maximum would be 20 units an acre.
That could be over 5,000
Well,
units.
and about half of this
That's
area,
what I
because it
thought.
includes all this area, so about half of it is the community center. So I think
Okay.
someone said 2,000 or,
Okay. I just think that's substantial enough to actually, in my opinion, want to possibly say 580, but that's my opinion.
And
I think I heard a suggestion, Peter, that we come up with a new land use designation, specific plan or something like that, but how would that work with the CEQA analysis?
well, we identify what potential uses would be within that category. We specify the maximum amount of commercial area, the maximum amount of residential density, and then that's looked at rather than the maximum or assumed build-out potential for that. That would be a limiting factor in that. So that would be plugged into the overall numbers that we would look at when we analyze the potential impacts of all these various land use designations.
Wouldn't that then be a land use category that is just specific to that project?
Yes, it would be. That site.
So then you have to do a different one for each site.
Well, I think that the description of it would be the same. It's essentially a mixed use. It sort of also goes to the Sanguinetti property that we discussed a few weeks ago that will be coming back up, where they have a mix of proposed recreational and housing units. So if we felt that those were appropriate designations, we could say, we're not going to just sort of allow the blanket approval of community center with the potential for 20 units per acre. We know that's too much for that site. But there is some development potential here that you would like to see, and by applying this future specific plan or some other some other name to it with specific, so each site, and there's probably only going to be, the most half a dozen of these. Right now there's potential for 3 or 4. That'd be very easy to plug into the overall density calculations for the general plan. But it would be, there would probably have to be some table that identifies, specific plan area 1, here's the maximum capacity. Number 2, and here, so that's attached to the map in some way so that people can understand that it's not 120 acres of community center that could be developed out at its maximum potential. It's a mixed-use development of some sort that's going to require a specific plan to come back in, and here's the maximum capacity that would be allowed.
it sounds to me like that is just a different way of describing, keeping it, say, CC with a maximum number of units, except it's more specific as to how many units max of what kind. Is that a fair statement? I mean, I'm not really against the idea, and maybe that's the way to go. Because I think what we're trying to do is come up with something that describes as well as we can what we envision for that area.
Right.
Instead of just having it CC for the whole thing with, 5,000 units, get as specific as we can, understanding it can't be that specific, which I guess then translates into a more accurate, if you will, CEQA analysis. Okay.
And direction to future property owners and the county, so this is what we anticipate for this. And so when development that comes in that is consistent with the plan, we know what that is. It clearly would not prohibit someone from asking for an amendment to the general plan, either increasing those numbers, changing the land use designation. That's always a possibility that someone has that option of requesting an amendment to the plan.
It sounds to me like that's just another way of wordsmithing this, if you will. I think I'm okay with that concept.
Well, I guess I'll take my turn. I'm an economic development consultant by profession, and, we're trained to pay attention to the numbers and the statistics, and to me, the numbers are really overwhelming in terms of we simply don't have the projected demand to support this kind of development. I mean, if you talk about flexibility, I'm for flexibility, but we're already creating or accommodating nearly 3 times the number of parcels compared to the projected demand, and I don't really think it's prudent to add on to that. I think approving these requests, and these comments will also apply to Copper Valley, it does put a financial burden on the county when we're doing the environmental analysis on the draft general plan, and I do believe it opens the door for our general plan to be challenged, which could create further delays in its adoption, and further delays is not what this county needs in terms of having a legally defensible general plan, especially a process that's already taken way too long. I guess on Sawmill, I will disagree with the staff recommendation, and I think it should be resource production as well as on Copper Valley. And my vote doesn't really have anything to do with the quality of the developer or the quality of the proposed development. I think Castle and Cook does an excellent job. But not approving these requests right now doesn't preclude Castle and Cook from seeking a land use change when the demand actually materializes, and I think that's the appropriate time to consider development in these areas.
Well, I don't have a good handle on the financial burden of the county to do the land use designation in substance, as the planning department has recommended and as Castle and Cook is comfortable with, whether we call it a future specific plan or use the designations we have. I just don't have a good handle on how much that would be. We're going to have to do a CEQA for the whole general plan anyways. And the incremental cost that will be associated with Sawmill, I just can't believe would be that great. And I think since Castle and Cook has indicated they do plan on going forward with this, and they are in the development business, I suspect that they think there's enough of a demand here to justify them putting their dollars out to try to make this happen. And I think it's some point on that issue, whether there's a demand. I think maybe the developers know better than certainly I do what that might be, because it's their money. So I think I'm still in favor of accepting the planning department's recommendation on Sawmill, with either some limitation with our existing categories or a specific plan category as Mr. Maurer has described.
I have to concur with Mr. Wooster on it and add that it seems essential to the furthering of Copperopolis's downtown infrastructure for in the future.
For me, this is part of the infill that we've talked about, and it is going to hopefully provide that infrastructure that's needed. I'm good with going with Kelly's proposal as well.
So we have 3 votes for, and what is the decision? You're going to create a new land use designation?
I think it'd be easier to track situations like this by having a separate land use designation. We could do it by just somehow identifying these specific areas under the community center and then modifying the language there. But I think it'd be easier over time to track it if it's a separate land use designation. So I will come back with a description of that. Think of an appropriate name. We can mull that around at the next meeting, or that when we conclude this whole process with that. But so my understanding is that it will be a mixed use similar to the community center designation with a limitation on residential density of 580 units.
I thought that Mr. Haley was agreeable to 580 units total.
Yes, that's what he was just
Right.
saying.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to Copper Valley.
May I suggest we take a lunch break?
It was just, do you think it'll take that long? Because otherwise, Mr. Haley won't have to wait till after lunch.
I don't know.
No? So no, not approving the land use designation request. Correct? I don't know what you're voting no about.
I don't know how long this is going to take.
Pardon me?
I said, I don't know how long Copper Valley is going to take us to wrestle with here.
Oh. So you're saying you was voting no having to do with lunch?
Yes.
All right, it's really up to you guys, you know. And do you want lunch now? Or do you want to, wait, maybe we could see if there's some consensus here? Yeah.
Let's check first on consensus.
Okay. And if it looks like it's going to take a while, then we'll have lunch. But if it's, you know, if not, then we save Mr. Haley from having to come back. I think I've already weighed in on it, so you know, I have the same concerns here as that I shared with Sawmill.
For me, I think that Saddle Creek or Castle and Cook has a whole lot of projects ahead of them, and that if we are going to analyze this general plan every couple of years and their development's turned out and our population has increased to justify it, I don't see an issue with holding that into resource production at this time and looking at it in a couple of years. For them to develop out the properties that we just gave them with what they're looking to do is kind of where I'm at.
Okay.
I concur.
So we've got 3 for resource production.
And it doesn't matter what I think.
Yeah, it does matter because I've always told
No, I'm
you,
just-
I
I'm
want
just
to
trying to
hear it
get
out.
where we're
It
at.
could change
So,
my
yeah.
mind.
We're deliberating
We are
right now.
deliberating. That
Yeah.
wasn't like, okay, Kelly, don't say a word. No, it was, I'm just trying to get a handle on where we're at.
Okay, well, I think this is different than the other two. It really is not infill. I have some concerns about the access here because there's no access to Highway 4, direct access other than Little John Road. And yes, you have Copper Cove Drive, but that's a pretty twisty, steep road. It's not that great an access. This is a large acreage. I'm not real clear on what the water situation is going to be for that. I mean, I know they have a pipe that goes to Copper Square, and presumably that would service Sawmill Estates, but as far as I know, there's nothing that's set up to serve Copper Valley. Maybe there's enough water to supply it. Probably, hope so. So I think on balance, I'm in agreement with the other commissioners, that on this one, I think it's just too much at this time.
All right, well, I think we've got 4 moving, supporting staff's recommendation on Copper Valley to tentative approval, or leave that as staff's recommended for resource production.
Okay.
Moving targets.
Okay, so now we'll have a lunch break.
Yeah, I would say too that I think we've made it pretty clear that this resource production is not set in stone here.
Definitely not, yes,
People,
definitely
and
not.
so I hope that folks who might oppose this development down the road don't use this vote as some sort of a lever to say, well, this has already been decided,
No,
and
no.
we're not
I
going to
think
do it
it's,
again.
I think it's premature.
And it's like I said, every couple of years, if we're going to look at it and the build-outs there and the population's there, it needs to be considered. I'll go on the record with that as well.
Okay.
Okay.
So we are recessed until 1:25.